So without further ado, let's continue on with our study through some of the women of the Hebrew Testament. So we've looked at Eve, we've looked at Hagar and Sarah. Today we're going to talk about two women, Tamar and Tamar's unnamed midwife, and how their story actually is not really well known in the tradition, and yet Tamar, is one of the women in Jesus's genealogy, which makes her incredibly important. Okay, so who is Tamar? So first of all, there's two people there's more than two people, but there's a few people named Tamar in the Bible. We're going to be looking right now at the one from Genesis. Specifically, her story can be found in Genesis 38. So I highly recommend going ahead and checking that out. Go ahead and read that story for yourself. I'm going to give you a little bit of a summary. It's kind of an interesting story, so buckle up. And again, I always like to give my sources. I am going to be relying heavily on Lindsay Freeman's Bible Women, which is a great book, and it has all the biblical women, all their words and why they're mattered. This is a good one. And this week I'm also relying heavily on the Women's Lectionary by Ashley Wilcox. But again, Wilda Gaffney also has some really amazing books on this too. Okay, here we go. So Tamar is a woman who had to fight for her own rights within her society. She gives us an example of just one of many examples, I suppose, in the Bible of how the patriarchy can fail marginalized people. In particular, within her society, she is marginalized because she's a foreigner and she marries into the line of Judah. We'll say more about that in a minute. But she is also at a given point a widow and a childless widow, which in this time frame would have meant that there were no rights given to her anymore. She was no longer protected by her husband or her husband's family. And what is also true is that she would not likely be protected for the whole of her life because children were expected to take care of their parents, especially a widowed mother. So in this story, Tamar, I love this first line. Tamar makes Calamity Jane look like Mary Poppins. That's that's from Lindsay Freeman. Very funny. I think that's hysterical. Tamar is married first and foremost to a man named E-R, a man named is the son of Judah. This would be Leah and Jacob's fourth son and the half brother of Joseph, the famed Joseph of amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat fame. He's the oldest of them, and then he ended up dying while they were married, but before they could have children. We don't know why he died. All the scripture says is that he was wicked in God's sight, and thus he died. So we don't know what he did. But upon the death of her husband, the Jewish law from Leviticus and Deuteronomy dictates that it's the duty of the next brother in line to marry the widow and to make sure that she has children. Again, not just to protect her lineage, but to protect the family line as well. This is, again, don't be shocked, but women and widows did not inherit anything in this time frame. So then the next brother in line is a man named Onan, O-N-A-N. He's the second brother, but he sees a chance here to receive his father Judah's inheritance. And so rather than helping Tamar in her state, as the law would dictate, instead, he practices this ancient form of birth control, and it says, spilled his seed on the ground, making sure that she could not get pregnant. This angered God, the scripture says, and Onan ends up dying as well. So she has now suffered two terrible losses, two losses of the husband, and now she is also without a house. So she is sent back to her parents' house, and Judah promises that he is going to, when his third son, Shelah, is old enough, he is going to marry Tamar to Shelah, the third brother. So she waits and she waits, and she's not given permission to marry anybody else, right? So she's kind of between a rock and a hard place here, and she waits and she waits and she waits. What ends up happening is that lo and behold, Sheila does come of age and is given over to marry somebody else. So Tamar is really stuck here. And this is where she takes on the qualities of a trickster, you might say, and I mean that in the classic literary style of ancient folklore, where a trickster is seen as somebody who is actually subverting the system. They're seen as kind of a good, like it's a good trait to be considered a trickster, and the scripture is really quite clear on this. Like there's no Tamar is not seen as wrong for what she does next. I'll put it that way. She ends up taking things into her own hands and saying that she will seduce the newly widowed Judah, so her father-in-law, in order to get her family claim. She ends up dressing as a temple prostitute, plants herself in Judah's path as he walks to the neighboring town, and catches his eye. Again, she's wearing a full veil and disguise. So Judah goes for it, and he doesn't have any cash on hand, so he ends up giving her his signet ring and his staff. These are no small deals. Like he ends up saying he'll come back for it when he has the money to do so, but those are like his entire identity and lineage bearing identifiers all in one. In fact, the word staff can also be translated as tribe in Hebrew. So the tribe is in her hands here in this scene. So he tries to keep that part of his word, at least. He didn't keep the rest of it to Tamar, and goes back to collect his staff, signet, and cord, the collateral he left with her. But she cannot be found. She's gone ahead and taken off her disguise. Months pass, months. And word reaches Judah that his daughter-in-law is indeed pregnant. This does not go well with him. He says that she has, she has made a mockery of the whole family, and that she should be burned alive for her adultery. Again, with him, he doesn't realize it, but you see the irony that's being built in here. She instead has the full presence of mind to go to Judah in the midst of everybody else. She's non-anxious. She's calm. She'd probably make a really good lawyer in another century, and holds up the cord, the ring, and the signet, the staff, as it were, and says, "It is the owner of these who made me pregnant." Judah acknowledges his part in all of this, and indeed praises her, saying that she has had the better part. So again, this may not be the way we might have handled this, but think of what she had to go through, the tremendous loss that she had to go through in order to get to this moment in her life. And as I said before, this ends up being incredibly important for the lineage of Jesus. It's through the birth, she ends up getting pregnant with twins from this encounter. And it's through the birth of one of her twins, Perez, that the line of Judah and Tamar continue through Boaz, Obed, King David, and eventually to Jesus. We hear that in the lineage shown forth in Matthew 1. She's given Judah 2 new sons, and is considered, one of the sons is considered the Lion of Judah, a symbol for Judah and his 12 tribes that would be used as the Jewish symbol for centuries. And that comes through Judah and this lineage. So it kind of goes to show how one decision for justice ends up making a mark throughout history. I also think it's very, very interesting here that she is this marginalized woman who ends up being able to subvert the patriarchy to do what's right in the eyes of the story. In the eyes of the story, judge her to be completely right. So the telling of the story, again, may not be the same as we would think as a solution, but in her day and age, for sure. And this marginalization actually leads to the continuation of the family line, which leads to David and Jesus, as I mentioned. thus saving the family name. So, I mean, she shows us a lot of things. She shows us a woman who is going to do what it takes for her family, for justice. It reminds us that actions by our ancestors make us who we are today. And I think it shows as well that her actions and her ability to move forward with the story actually then leads to the Messiah itself in the Christian tradition. Um, so I also think that we tend to think of Jesus as like having this beautiful, perfect pedigree, but the women in his lineage show a much more scrappy and creative version of the story. And for those of us who have our own stories about our family tree that maybe sometimes like we think are less than glamorous, maybe we need to reassess them and say, what were people doing in their time to get along, right? To get by. Um, there's also another woman in the story. It's Tamar's midwife. She does not get named. She's in Genesis 38, verses 27 through 30. When the time of Tamar's delivery came, and there were two twins in her womb, the midwife is the one who was able to watch the twins come. One came out and then went back in. It's this kind of crazy story. She put a red cord on his hand, and the other one came out after. Ended up coming out first. She named the conflict between the two of them, and I think there's something really important about that, because clarity is important when practicing one's profession, and so is naming with clarity potential conflict. It's actually like a part of the healing arts, perhaps, to be able to say, look, I see a problem coming. And she did. She named that between the two twins. Um, I see a problem coming, but also, being able to name something for what it is. How often have you been a part of an issue where people are just kind of beating around the bush, and it actually doesn't lead to any sort of good pastoral interaction? Brene Brown will always use the phrase that clarity is kindness, and I think that's what she's talking about here. The midwife was practicing her healing arts by naming what she saw. I also like this note here, again, in this same book, Bible Women and Their Words. You never know how the implications of your work will have implications thousands of years later. Very true of this midwife here. And then finally, midwives were the ones in scripture who were able to bring new life, and they play a major role in many important stories in scripture. We think of this one, we certainly think of the Moses story. The spirituality of women, helping women to bring new life into this world, and that can be the life of a child or metaphorical new life, right? Helping one another bring a new creation into this world, I think is incredibly important. So I would invite you to list within yourself, maybe even take out a piece of paper as a spiritual practice today, list some of the ways that you have helped to birth new life in God's name, or how another person has helped you to do the same. Okay, friends, that is the racy story of Tamar, a woman who had to do what she had to do, and she took matters into her own hands. So I hope you enjoyed this.